Hello, if you enjoy this podcast, I'd be very grateful if you could go to GoFundMe, and there's a page called Toby's Wheezing and Groaning for 10k for Ukraine. There's also a link in the blurb that accompanies this. Basically, I'm running 10 kilometres to raise medical aid and assistance for the beleaguered people of Ukraine. And 10k, I'm not an athlete at all. And as you'll note, these podcasts are free and I don't put advertising on. So if you do enjoy them, if you could, on this occasion, perhaps any amount, if everyone that listened gave a tiny amount, I'd raise quite a large amount. So any amount to that GoFundMe page for Ukraine, I will suffer in order to justify the payment. I'd be most grateful. It's happy times and places in which I, Toby Hadoke, accentuate the positive in order not to accidentally slag off somebody I might then meet at a convention as we watch a Doctor Who story chosen by a friend of mine. They choose their favourite things, I have to guess what they are.
My name's Matt Hayden. I train people in conflict management, teamwork, communication skills, cultural diversity, things like that. And all of these fascinating topics, I think, are examined in immense detail in my choice of story. It's The Two Doctors, and I'll be fascinated to see what you think of it.
Well, welcome everybody. It's very dark here in Haydoke Towers. It's gone 1 a.m. and I should be going to bed, but I've just been catching up with The Walking Dead, and that reminded me that I have a grotesque instalment of Doctor Who still to do, and I thoroughly enjoyed part 2 of The Two Doctors, which, as you heard, I am watching with Matt Hayden, a friend of mine, a cineast, a man of culture and erudition, and also base humour and low morals. He's a good mix, is Matt, but he's not a dyed-in-the-wool Who fan, so his perspective is an interesting one. His choice is an interesting one, a story that I know many dislike. I've always had a soft spot for it. And as I say, one illustrious person I know thinks it the worst script ever written for Doctor Who. And this is a person who likes the work of Robert Holmes, as I do. So anyway, let's see what delights on the menu as we go for part 3. I am on the DVD. I am on episode selection. So I'm going to press enter now for part 3. And fans of last episode of Happy Times and Places hopefully weren't throwing things at their stereo or headphones or computer or however you digest this hourly, because I was correct. It was between episodes 2 and 3 of The Two Doctors that the cancellation/hiatus of Doctor Who was announced by the BBC, called as it was by Michael Grade, violent and unimaginative, and we're just about to have a pretty grim episode, which some could say justifies his argument. And let's not get into whether it was a hiatus or a cancellation. I think the clever money is on they were going to cancel it, and there was so much uproar that they had to change their minds. So I don't know what's in. Why Shockeye has a bullet belt? I don't know what's in there. Presumably herbs, and so he's just got sort of paprika that he can spray on any passing creature that he slaughters for the table. Or does he say you're a fine fleshy beast? I love that. Ripe for the table, for the knife. I love it, and I love this little. That's just a little thing they've worked out where they go, well, he can. And I like the fact that they're sort of strong, but they don't make a meal of that. If you'll excuse me, but I like the way he just does that little sort of bash that a chef would know could knock out a creature. He doesn't have to use force. He just knows which nerve to hit, which I like. I haven't mentioned Val much, have I? Val was for many years my favourite Sontaran because he was my first Sontaran, even though he took off his helmet in long shot. But the more times I've watched this, the more times I realize he doesn't actually do anything except occasionally goes, "Yes, sir." And have I talked about the fact that Stike is Welsh? He's one of in an honourable tradition of I will leave none of you alive here. I would dearly love to kill you, Doctor. Did I do that last week? Last week, I only did it yesterday. And when I do the android invasion, Stigron is Welsh, even though the actor that plays Stigron is not. I was convinced for years he was. Science Chadaki. But he was actually, I think he was from Hampstead, Martin Friend. But so I don't know what it is about playing monsters that sometimes makes you sound Welsh, whether you're supposed to be or not. Would you really operate a computer bank with a gun? But it's a nice piece of business. But and I like this. I like this scene. This was Doctor Who to me. You know, the Doctor being confronted by the monster, Jamie in mortal peril. I always loved the fact that Jamie had a knife in his sock. Since I read about it in Tomb of the Cybermen, I mean, you wouldn't now. But as I've said before, knives were containable. Knives were the less bad thing. It was guns that were visceral and nasty. Knives were... So people had knives. We had pen knives. Seems extraordinary now. But I love the joke of this. Sontarans are invincible. I'll stab him in the knee. But I love this. There's going to be a laser beam. I love a laser beam and a well-placed explosion where the laser beam hits. I love that. That's all brilliant. Love that. I think that's all great. He's got the knife sticking out. I love that whole sequence because it's sort of Doctor Who's not often that action-packed in the studio. It's hard to look good with sort of multi-camera. It's really hard to stage. And you know, even now, I think when soaps do action-packed episodes, they struggle sometimes because you know we're not used to doing it particularly. But this is the beginning of Stike's descent, where he's bleeding green goo, which you always like a bit in Doctor Who. And it's the running gag of every time we see Stike, he gets progressively more knackered. But yes, Tim, I know. I read an interview with Tim Rainham in a Doctor Who magazine summer special, who plays Val, who I think had written to the Doctor Who production team quite a lot. But he'd written and sort of said, you know, seeing as you've cast that really ugly actress Nicola Bryant, you need somebody beautiful like me, because I think he was alluding to the fact that I don't think he necessarily would consider himself a looker. He was inverting the idea that. You know, because Nicola Bryant is a very beautiful woman. And so he rather wittily got himself the part. Good for him. I'm not sure he's ever responded to any requests since for interview. I know some of the chaps who track down actors have had no luck with him, although he's still about. But anyway, I admire his chutzpah. Whenever I've tried to display chutzpah to get cast in things, because I'm not very good at playing the game like that. That's an example of somebody being, you know, taking a risk and it paying off. And I like that. Trevor Cooper did a similar thing. I think one of his early, yes, he's going to say yes, sir, isn't he? Sir, that's what he does. But bless him, he got to go to Spain. Trevor Cooper, I think, when I said to him, well, you played the jailer in A Winter's Tale. That was really early in your career. And I think he'd basically written and said, can I play? I think I could probably play Hermione, but if you've cast that part, I suppose I could do the jailer or something like that. Or he said, I really, really want to play the jailer, or failing that, you could cast me as Hermione. It was something. It was one of those. And I've always just tried to sort of be nice. And every time I've tried to be sort of charming or funny, you can see it never quite works. I never quite know how to take it. So I don't know why, what it is about me, who I think can be, you know, funny and quick-witted on stage as a comic. You know, I've got away with it in front of rooms and rooms of people. On a one-on-one situation where it gets me a job, I've always fouled it up. So whilst I admire the chutzpah of Tim Rainham, part of me is devastated that such a thing can pay off when other people try it. When I try it, that I end up mucking it up somehow. There's his fags. There's his fags and lighter. Shockey's fags and lighter in his tummy. Now, interestingly, a dear old friend of mine, Sarah from university, was teaching in Stockport or somewhere, and she said, "Can you come and show my kids some?" This was after I'd left university and was sort of jobbing about. She said, "Can you come and show my students some sci-fi? I'm trying to teach them about sci-fi." So I showed them bits of I think I showed this scene where he's. Oh no, maybe it's the later one where he's sizing up Jamie and talking about Jamie as we would talk about livestock. And I brought him some X-Files as well, this hoary old sequence where John Finn and David Duchovny are walking down a corridor, and it's a massive exposition dump to try and make it, tying it up with historical events and lots of stock footage and trying to sound important because it was tying it in with Vietnam and JFK and all of that. And it was appalling. It was an appalling screed of pseudo-portentousness. And of course they loved that and they thought the Doctor Who looked rubbish. But I have... He's just lopsided. They do lopsided. Those collars, I think, are unforgivable. And I know the actors are in Spain, and that's a brilliant shot, and so need to breathe. But they're untucked. I think it's unforgivable. And I remember this. Yes, because it's the sort of betrayal of Shockeye. Because of course they have to zap him because he talks about fouling the blood of the Quansi Grig. So they're genetic purists as well, or Shockeyes, as well as being a horrible butcher. But I quite like that. I think I just like a laser beam, but I like the sort of dramatic subjugation of Shockeye there. But yes, as I think I said last night, I wasn't particularly taken with the idea of Patrick Troughton having to androgum it up for a bit, because I wanted to see, perhaps I'm into pure, I wanted to see his pure Doctor. So what was I talking about? So hang on. Yes, I got annoyed with the collars. I was talking about... Doesn't matter. It'll come back to me. And if it doesn't... It doesn't. Now, Dastari confuses me in this episode because he's doing the... Because we know he's a friend of the Doctor, and I love all that stuff with him in Troughton at the beginning, where he's obviously a decent scientist who's just, wanting to advance science. But then he gets sort of all a bit sarky. And now, having got to the point where he's doing... the next progression of his experiment, having laid waste to his own space station and not sort of questioned anything, he's now suddenly gone, it's halfway through episode 3. I think the only way they're going to get rid of me is if I develop a conscience and my own creation has to finish me off. But Lawrence Payne's very dignified performance, even though he looks like a member of Buggles. Dastari killed the Androgum Star. Augmentation killed the Androgum Star. I think he's great. And I'm glad Peter Moffat knew his actors well enough to call an actor out of retirement. Oh yes, I was teaching the students, and I've never forgotten, because when I showed them the scene of Jamie, I wanted them to go, oh yes, they're treating Jamie like we treat animals. I wanted them to pick up on the fairly obvious sort of metaphor there in the subtext of how we talk about animals. The we's of this story is that we are suddenly the livestock. And I said, so what's your first impression of that? And this young lad went, low budget. And I went, no. And I immediately went, no. And then sort of said, well, no, what I was looking for was, and tried to get him to talk about the subject matter. But the fact that I was so quick on when they said low budget, that's an interesting observation. I should have been able to go say, okay, what makes you think that compared to the X-Files and blah, blah, blah. And they much preferred the X-Files clip, even though it was nonsense. But I, as a teacher, as it were, should not have been so quick to react, because I was reacting because of the own scars I bore about Doctor Who being, dismissed as being low budget, etc., etc. So, and it's always stuck with me, and I hope that child wasn't put off an academic career or an interest in media studies or indeed science fiction because of a teacher that brought his own private grief to the classroom. But I still remember it. An Androgum. Now, these two have an awful lot of fun doing this, and I rather enjoy it. But as I say, I wasn't too hot at the time, and those eyebrows are a livid red, aren't they? But I do like the idea of these two old gents going around eating everything. Oh, and so this is where they must have been baking in that teat. I always think it's a bit lazy when the baddies kill the baddies, but you sort of have to have it in Doctor Who. But they used to do it in 24 all the time. In 24, after about 6 episodes, you tell that the producers had got bored of the villain, so then they'd get a super villain to come and kill the previous villain, because, they'd go, oh, you haven't killed Jack Bauer. Instead of going, let's work together to kill Jack Bauer, they go, I'm going to kill you. And all the other underlings go, that's just what we do, we kill each other when it doesn't work. And that actor, I think viewers, we need to escalate the villainy, so now we've got a villain who's at a higher level in villain towers. No, it's weird because in 24 the villain was not afraid to kill people, but of course Doctor Who generally, and except for there's always an exception that proves the rule. Generally, look, the collar goes right up to his nose. I'm sorry, I know I have to accentuate the positive, but I'm not a fan of the collars. I'm glad they've got a probic vent, but I remember being cross because I loved it. I knew that the Sontarans could be killed by a probic vent, and then suddenly this acid stuff kills them, and you're like, no, I wanted them to get killed by the probic vent because that's how Sontarans die. Because I'd read them in the books. So Val gets a fairly crap death, bless him. That canister has blown up quite near him, and so that's killed him. But I think the timing of when the sparks hit Stike there, it does look like the acid is hitting his face, and then the green stuff is sort of sprouting out. And I think that's just by a sort of accident of the sparks where they are and the camera angle and the way he turns. But it does look like it's hitting him, and the sort of the face guts are sort of spurting out. So that's actually quite effective. And I remember the first time seeing that, going, oh, that looks pretty grim. But if you examine it, it's not how it first appears. But that's the beauty of sometimes a shot can cheat, even though that wasn't I'm sure the intention either. They just lucked out, but very good. But yeah, I did want them to get killed by probic vent because that was one of the pieces of Doctor Who lore that I'd learnt from the Target books. Because as I say, this is the first time I'd seen the Sontarans. Because I discovered so much of Doctor Who through the Target books. So there was nothing more exciting than the end of Part 1 of Earthshock. And I think that excitement of my generation seeing the Cybermen for the first time. Yay, Stike's still alive. Covered in... It's quite an indignity, and I think it's quite funny, isn't it? Because he spends the whole thing being this sort of military guy, and they give him the swagger cane, and he's certainly the most sort of militaristic in the way that in the sense that we understand it and I identify it. Previous Sontarans have been militaristic. Kevin Lindsay had a great sort of gait and clip delivery and stuff, but Stike's got a swagger cane and stand at ease and all of that. They sort of labour it slightly, but the fact that he's got all of that, and so sort of has pretensions of being a sort of officer type, and then spends the whole of episode 3 just getting smacked to bits and getting... Now, I seem to recall, it's rather sad that in the Doctor Who magazine archive of these, that nobody knows the name of this poor Spanish extra who plays the driver, and you'd have thought somebody would have written it down to commit him to history, but because he doesn't have a line, I think he's a stuntman because he has to do that, and again, I think that's quite a nice suggestion of the strength of the Androgam, because if you hit somebody on the back with a log, they wouldn't die, but clearly he has big strength, because yes, they emphasize the fact that a man has been killed. I mean, they don't check, but yes, we don't know who that or we didn't at the time. Somebody clever might have found out since who the lorry driver is, but as it's an actor, I will never be able to, sort of knock on the door of. I don't think I mean, I'd love to travel to Seville, but I think I would have trouble justifying it to my family and indeed the taxman to go, I'm going there to interview the man who gets hit by the log from the two doctors. I love this music. And this is very funny because he's getting into his MFI time machine. And of course, because he's done that, so that's a nice little plot placing of the Doctor's trick. The Doctor's trick to Stike, and then he has to fall out, and he's covered in even more green. And then he has the indignity of having to post double line to explain that he thinks that Chessene has double-crossed him, or whatever it is he says there. I think that's definitely done in post. And this is where they have the obligatory, we're in a foreign location. Do you remember Arc of Infinity 4? We are now going to run around the streets a lot, because that's what you do when you're on location. It's almost like you don't need to have much that's going on in the story, because the story has been substituted by location. I think now we go, well, let's tell the story within the location. But in those days, you could go, well, we've done one, so we actually don't have to do the other. Those were the days. It's like as if going abroad was enough. Do we have to do anything else? No, we've gone abroad. That's that the viewers will be so agog that they can see Spain on their living room television in Slough or Wigan, they'll be so dazzled by the foreign climate that we don't need to burden them with story or plot. I actually do quite enjoy watching actors having fun. I think there's probably less patience for it now, and I'm not sure the world is a better place. I think seeing two old thesps lording it about Spain in top hats, and the way that he's washing his hands, and I like the way that Troughton describes the food. They do the food stuff in this very well. The shepherd's pie joke is very good earlier. But the thing that the light salad with artichoke hearts, but all the digestive juices, all of that, I think they do all of that really, really well. It's like the pan frying the gumblejack in its own juices. The way that the food is described, I think the way he makes a simple salad, because he's quite clever. He doesn't just go for all the relish of the sort of gourmand stuff. Even a simple light salad. And I like food, and I like different foods, and I think that captures the beauty of eating, but of course then just juxtaposes it with the fact that actually it's a very functional thing, and we as humans dress up what is actually a very functional thing, consuming fuel, and because we're apes with ideas above our station. We sort of dress it up and go, oh, well, this is very severe. No, what you're doing is you're slaughtering a thing and you're gorging on its flesh. But that will make it sound very sophisticated. There's Peter Moffat, the director, having a glass of wine. And that's Mercedes Carnegie, isn't it, who is the sort of fixer that they had over there. So gave her a charming cameo, which if you were ill-disposed towards this here, you go, oh, that's just indulgent. But I actually quite like it. I quite like Dastari getting the rose. I think it's quite a sweet moment. It doesn't lead to anything. It doesn't have anything to do with anything else. I think that good tongue acting. I like a Sontaran tongue. Always like a Sontaran tongue. And you think that's the end of Stike. He does have one more moment to shine. And we have had the setup of the ship self-destructing. So that all ties in, although it's not, because you don't see him go into the ship. It's not brilliantly clear, but it's it's all right. And I really like Oscar. I've said this before. I think James Saxon is very, very good. And yes, so Robert Holmes is very good at. Do we serve humans here? His reply is very nice. And he just calls him a fawning imbecile, doesn't he? That idea that we we can we kid ourselves that, well, or is it what separates us from the animals? Our enjoyment of food, that it's more than just something to keep us alive and to keep us alert so that we don't get preyed upon ourselves, is perhaps what separates us from the animals. But also, it is a very functional thing, and it goes in one end and comes out the other, and we don't eulogize the latter, so why do we get so fancy about the former? But I'm interested in that sort of that contradiction within us. Colin Baker does the fancying the cat acting very well. I totally believe that he wants to eat that cat. And I wonder, could we cut to other adventures where each of the other doctors is getting very hungry? I'm sure you could probably do it. I wonder if you could do it with existing stories where the doctor's sort of getting a bit famished. You could have Davison eating his celery, couldn't you? Pertwee suddenly in Day of the Daleks go, I very like this wine and blue cheese. It's actually because this is when the Andriggum inheritance is taking its toll. I'm surprised somebody hasn't done a short trips or some such where suddenly each of the other incarnations of the Doctor is hankering for scran. I'm not sure of the timeline here, because they've eaten. Because a family paella would take a paella. I think takes quite a good long time to cook if you're going to do it properly. So I don't get the impression that the others have been searching for quite that long. But it's worth it for the phrase "a gargantuan repast," which is a lovely phrase that I think I have occasionally used myself. I think that says quite a lot about me, that I occasionally have unconsciously used Oscar Botcherby's dialogue. Not somebody cool, not somebody hard or villainous or exciting, not even the Doctor, the hero. I've used an absurd actor, an absurd out-of-work actor who murders moths. And is the subject of a very controversial moment in this episode. But before we get to that, that extra's giving that waiter a bit of stick. I don't know what that's about. Do they not like? Have they been told, oh, you're not really enjoying what they're getting up to? I think John Stratton's brilliant at this, sort of going, what's this? He's not being villainous here. He's enjoying his meal and going, but what's this? And then I like the fact that instead of going, I'm not going to give you money, he goes, no, that's what we do, yeah. This is our tally. Yeah, I like that. That, lazier writing would go, I'm the villain, I don't expect to pay. He just expects to pay. It's just that he doesn't realise that the 20 Narg note is not accepted. But the waiter that was being given stick, I think one, or certainly one of the, I think it's the one is Nedjet Salih, who was Ali Osman in EastEnders about a year later, one of the first regulars in EastEnders, but he did bits of extra work. I remember seeing him pop up, I think, as one of the background builders in Auf Wiedersehen Pet, and he's there in Doctor Who a year before becoming a soap opera regular in EastEnders. I've seen him crop up in other stuff since, but I think EastEnders was the biggest flowering of his career. And I like the whole acidized my digestive juices, because I have to say, if somebody's nagging me when I'm eating, it's just like, can I just finish my tea? But this, how do we feel about this, everybody? I would be interested. On my Patreon page, I have a lot of the kind people who contribute there. When I post these up, give their opinions. Hello, Sabrina Tirabassi and Guy Lambert and Ruben and Joe Llewellyn. Lots of lovely people there. I'd be interested in your opinion of that. I as a kid, thought this was Doctor. I like Doctor Who being gritty and violent because it was a riposte to the idea that I was obsessed with the idea that people thought Doctor Who was a children's program. Even though I was 11, I was like, yeah, but I'm not watching kid stuff. I'm watching stuff that grown-ups like. It's made by the drama department, you know. I was desperate for it to be grown up. Of course, now I sometimes see things that are desperate to be grown up are the most childish. I mean, the fact that the first grown-up thing Torchwood tried to do was an orgasm monster, I thought was so silly. And I, in fact, wrote a sketch where the next episode it will be a monster that hides itself in alien knickers and can only be defeated by swearing. And I found this terribly shocking. And that's a quote from Hamlet that Colin does very well. But unfortunately, they then sort of largely forget about poor old Oscar now. And by the time they get to film, which is obviously made in a different country and at a different time, it's like he never died at all. Which I think is often a problem with the original Doctor Who, is that things don't have consequences beyond a couple of scenes. And I know that sometimes people don't like more modern Doctor Who because emotions carry on, through episodes and beyond. But that is more sort of realistic. If you'd seen a man murdered, you wouldn't be squabbling about which direction to go in. And the way he says, "Where are you, Anita? I can't see you," I think is terribly touching, because the idea that and quite sort of grim and grotesque, and yet the idea that this terrible actor, even at his death, he does this kind of he gives himself his moment. He gives himself his rather wonderful death scene that is sort of better than he would have done if he'd been acting. If he had been playing, he'd have been a terrible Hamlet. You never got to see my definitive Hamlet. So it's still full of great jokes. But it is rather sad because James Saxon is so very good, because it's a stabbing. I mean, I think that is, and I know some people who think that's terribly misjudged, and I would find it hard to argue with them, apart from the fact that I've found the scene, sad and horrible, and the violence, turned my stomach in a way, so it sort of did its job, and yet it's therefore entertainment, and we're being entertained in a story that's telling us about how, poorly we treat livestock, whilst at the same time perpetrating some pretty grim and unpleasant violence under the guise of children's tea time entertainment. So I'm aware it's a slightly schizophrenic piece, but I find the scene of Oscar's death actually to be rather well done, but its very presence probably to be, I would probably reluctantly have to say it's misjudged, because he's a great character and it's a pretty horrible thing to do to him. But then this is a story with a grotesque sense of humour, as evidenced by Shockeye coming in with Stike's leg, which I think is terribly funny. I've just been watching The Walking Dead, which has much more grotesque stuff than any Doctor Who of this period, although this, you can tell that they've enjoyed Earthshock and Resurrection of the Daleks and gone, why don't we try and make Doctor Who this grim and grown up all the time? And Robert Holmes has gone, yeah, but I'm going to throw jokes into mine. And I have to say, I like that, The Walking Dead is good fun and very, really well made, and it's got lots of, but actually, there's very rarely a sort of sense of humour amongst the grand guignol, the grotesqueness, whereas the whole point of Stike getting more and more injured is to sort of revel rather blackly in the grim humour of it. So he's put through all of these indignities until the point where he ends up as half a leg, which is supposed to be funny, and which is funny. Colin Baker's very good at the reassuring wink. And there's something very, even though he's this sort of catty, scatty, spiky doctor, he does have a reassuring nature that I'm so pleased to see him bestow upon young, nervous fans, or even young fans who really know who he was in the early days of the sort of resurgence of the show, and fans would be at Doctor Who conventions, and so sort of aware of the classics, but he would never let that faze him, and treated everybody like he was a reassuring doctor. I think he's a great ambassador for the show, and a very nice man. And I'm sure I've mentioned the first Doctor I ever met, and I couldn't have been luckier. He was very kind. And I do think I think he's sometimes given some rotten lines, but I think he always does them as well as they can be done. Can I cook one of the humans? And he has the Jack. I like the fact that he's that's what Robert Holmes does very well. Instead of saying, can I have the male, can I have the Jack, you know exactly what he means. But it complements the vocabulary that has been used thus far. It gives it a suitably alien but not outlandish sort of verbal palette, vocabulary. Very good. And just the use of the word Jack, I think he just has little sprinkles of cleverness there. Well, now what's Dastari doing? Dastari's a prick. So nice, conscience-stricken Dastari goes, but I'll leave the keys there. I mean, so you might be able to try and escape. So is he being mean there and going, I'll leave them just out of the reach to tempt you, in which case that doesn't tie in with the sort of nice conscience-stricken Dastari we see a bit, fairly soon. So it's just poor old Lawrence Payne is having to do, I think, contradictory things. But and I like the little bits that they have where they speak in unison to remind you that they're both the same person. And I like, because Troughton is sort of the nicest Doctor in a way, because he's so sort of jolly and Pix-like, but he's an absolute dick when he's with another Doctor. The way that he winds up Pertwee and he banters with Colin Baker. He's actually quite a tricky bugger, but what a great face. It's odd that he decided to go. But I've got to have grey hair, because it's just that. But if you're your Doctor, you didn't have grey hair then. But there we go. So yes, I would be interested to see how and you could tweet as well if you like at Hadoke Podcasts to tell me what you think of sort of Oscar's death and the violence. I suppose, which is the sort of headline news about this, because it really well. And there's a bit later, and especially as, of course, I'm supposed to be accentuating the positive. So this is the scene I showed the students where I was, I think, a bad teacher. I think teachers should be slightly loftier and not display their weaknesses. I remember my son's teacher entered Pop Idol and one of them, X Factor, and didn't get through, and I said, oh, that's a shame. He said, yeah, she said the judges were, and instead of going, yeah, it's a shame I did my best and I lost, there was a kind of, oh yeah, they didn't want me because they didn't want, there was umbrage there and a suggestion of foul play or favourite or whatever. And I remember thinking, a teacher shouldn't be doing that. A teacher should be using that, even if she had felt hard done by. She shouldn't have transmitted that to the students. She sort of transmitted to the students, well, I did my best and it didn't pay off, so I will still do my best next time. And I like to think that none of my teachers would have shown such weakness. But of course, nostalgia is full of lies, and my teachers were probably just as imperfect, but I saw them as teachers. Anyway, I don't know. Perhaps I'm just getting old. But I've gone off piste a little bit, but it just reminded. It's because this scene reminded me of a moment where I had shown my weakness when I was in the rare position of being able to influence or instruct young people, which doesn't happen very often. There's knives. There's a lot of knives in this. You need knives if you've got a story set in kitchens, of course. But it's quite a bendy knife, this one. I seem to recall. Yes, it's already bent. I don't know why they need. Is it because it's a prop knife? But that's brilliant. Because you see it cut into his trousers and you see the blood. Now I don't know again if that's a little bit of trickery in the imagination doing the work, but the cut really works there. The knife is no longer bent. This is a great shot of the three, but it does look a bit like it's been shot in COVID time with Dastari miles away to the back. It's like when people have a chat in outside the Rovers in Korea, and there's three people who know each other, but it was actually filmed at the height of COVID, so they're sort of having a conversation in a triangle where everyone's 2 meters apart. So this is COVID in severe. But this is brilliant. The longing that she does there. Jacqueline Pearce is excellent in this, and then you have her succumbing to the beast within, and I'm drawn to that very idea. That look how she does that sensual longing, and then Dastari is. It would be enough to set him over the edge if he had any sort of consistent characterization. But I think that's a brilliant moment. I think Jacqueline Pearce does it superbly. But I'm very much drawn to that idea of, what we dress ourselves up as. We are all beasts. We are all animals that get ideas above our station. And what makes us good is our intellect. And sometimes I don't think it's bad to have bad thoughts so long as you don't act upon them. Do you know what I mean? I think sometimes to show that we have a veneer of civilization, we sometimes deny that we think the things that we think, lest other people think bad things of us. And I sort of think, well, no, I think some of our thoughts come from our natural instincts, and what makes us good and decent and better than the animals is that we overcome those instincts with rationality and intelligence. And what makes Doctor Who a great hero is that he doesn't poison people to death and then make a joke. So it's a good job he's not about to do that. I remember I sat in on the Resurrection of the Daleks DVD commentary. I didn't do it. Nick Pegg moderated that, and I remember Eric Saywood saying, "Oh yeah, this bit here, in the script it says the Doctor shoots the two guards just before he goes in and kills Davros." Now, the reason that scene is effective is because the Doctor's going, "I'm going to kill Davros," and you go, my goodness, Doctor Who doesn't kill people. It's totally undermined if he kills the guards, so I'm glad he didn't kill the guards. But it just showed how Eric Saywood, who I like sort of the toughness, I like some of the no-nonsense of what he brings to Doctor Who, because it is the stuff I sort of liked as a kid. I much preferred that to what I saw as some of the sort of beige walking around spaceships that happened quite a lot in the Davison era. This was much more to my taste. Oh God, his warts look particularly horrible in this shot. Old shock eye. But this, I think, is, I'm afraid, again, I know I'm supposed to be accentuating the positive. What I love about Doctor Who is that he doesn't kill people, and he solves things with his wit and with his intellect. And I know as a liberal that makes me a hypocrite, because Doctor Who has blown up many buildings where he hasn't therefore directly dispensed death, and somehow that is more palatable. I'm aware I'm having my liberal cake and eating it, and then giving that liberal cake laced with poison to somebody who dies 20 years later, and that makes me feel like I haven't directly killed them myself. But nonetheless, I think actually having the Doctor directly kill somebody and then making the joke is I think, I'm sorry, Eric Saywood, and the fact that we wanted him to shoot those two guards just out of expedience suggests that, yeah, I know the argument is, well, sometimes I know what Eric Saywood says. He says when you're dealing with violent situations, violence is the only answer, but not for Doctor Who. That Doctor Who is unlike other heroes on the telly in that he doesn't deal death if he can help it. He does, or he or she does. The Doctor does what they do. Good death there. Lawrence Payne wasn't a young man there, and I think he does a good, and it's a good laser gun zap. I like a zap. So poor old Dastari, but again, I mean, he was swimming against the tide of consistency. And then Jamie gets to use his knife. And the whole thing has been set up because the Doctor's done the trick. So I like all the stuff with the time machine and Karts and Reimer, who we never see. I'm surprised somebody's not done a short trips or a little some segue story about Karts and Reimer. The fading there was much better than it was with Patrick Troughton in the restaurant, because obviously take them away, put makeup, come back, take them away, put makeup, come back. So, yes, much as I like the two Doctors, I sort of have to pretend that there's not a bit at the end where the Doctor murders Shockeye, even though Shockeye is a villain. He is, from Shockeye's point of view, he's a chef. He's just dealing with livestock. He's dealing with what he sees as lesser creatures. So although, yes, by our standards, he is villainous. By his standards, he's he's just he's just a particularly pragmatic gourmand. And this is the end of Patrick Troughton in Doctor Who. This is the last we see of Patrick Troughton. So farewell, my favourite. That's the last we see of Patrick Troughton. Goodbye. What a brilliant actor he was. What a fine Doctor. It's a very schizophrenic story, this, isn't it? So we're going to have the punchline now, which is going, well, what we've learnt now that I've just murdered a man is that eating meat is bad. And I've been a vegetarian since I was 11. But I'm not a vegan. So again, you could say, that's hypocritical in that, yes, I won't eat the thing that's directly like an animal, but I will eat stuff that's been produced from kind of some of the same processes. And so we all compromise our morality. There are contradictions in all of our moralities, which is why it ill behoves us to be judgmental of others. I just try to do the best I can, as one man said, but I'm aware of the inherent contradictions. So perhaps I shouldn't be quite so hard on Dastari. In fact, John Stratton gets top guest billing. Very well. Look, I am not. It's really interesting. I am not saying this is a faultless story by any stretch of the imagination. I even have some sympathy with the person that said it was the worst Doctor Who script of all time. No, I don't think I'd go that far at all. But I can see their objections with it in terms of what it pitches, what it says, some of the choices it makes, that sort of schizophrenia that it has. And yet I enjoy it. I enjoy the characters. I enjoy what it has to say. I enjoy some of the jokes, and I think it's a largely effective production. I know Peter Moffat gets, actually hang drawn and quartered, largely because you don't get the Sontaran mask in close up, and that's enough to go. Then it's terribly directed. I actually think there's some nice direction in places, and also he was so efficient that they got more stuff shot in Spain than was scheduled. And you go, well, when sometimes people didn't even finish making the program, that's worth its weight in gold when you're making television in the 1980s. So, I get to choose three things. Two things from this episode and one bonus thing. So I think the two things I'm going to choose for this episode, I love the gag of, with an honourable mention of that scene, because I used to watch that scene quite a lot. Sometimes I think when I watched the episode, I'd go back and watch that scene again. I love the scene where Stike makes the Doctor get into the time machine, and then Jamie stabs him, and then he shoots the laser. I love that scene because it just excited me. And I remember when I got it on video, having watched this the first time, and I got it on video as a sort of collector, and I remember going, oh, I'd forgotten, oh, this is a really good scene, and it excited me and it thrilled me. But I think Stike will be included, and I think Clinton Grain is excellent as Stike, but I think Stike will be included in my favourite thing is I like the running gag of Stike, of the indignities that Stike suffers from being burnt in the face a bit, to then going in the time machine and melting a bit more, and then going into a spaceship and being blown to bits and just being a leg. I think that's deliberate and very funny, and as a bleak... it excuses some of the grotesqueness in the story because it's obviously done there with a sort of streak of black humour, which I kind of like. And the other thing is, it's got to be that scene where Jacqueline Pearce so brilliantly succumbs to the feral beast within, the creature of, what is it Dastari calls them, a creature of instinct. It's interesting what you say about can a whole race be base creatures of, I think that's quite simplistic to say, well, we can't make the androgams brainy because they're all the same. But we're talking about kids' tea time science fiction, and the what the androgams are is they are alien gourmands. They are creatures who enjoy sensual pleasures. And sometimes in Doctor Who, a whole species can have one characteristic, and that helps with the telling of this story. So, but I'm aware that in perhaps more sophisticated fare, you'd have a hard job getting that past as a thing you can do in a script to say, well, a race is all entirely the same. And I'll be interested to see if Matt brings any of that up, because he does do stuff about cultural sensitivities, and he's very much at the cutting edge of how we deal with such things in these times when we have to be very aware of those things, and rightly so. But nonetheless, that scene that Jacqueline Pearce does so well, and it's a really grim and quite un-Doctor Who-y thing of the Doctor's blood on the step, and she puts it to her face and she licks it, and Dastari's reaction. I think it's an excellent scene and pretty grim as well. But that pull between base instinct and intellectual advancement, if you like, I think is interesting and very well done. So those are my two things for that episode, and I think my thing for the whole thing is I like the central wheeze. I like the conceit of we're on the food chain. That's that's the central metaphor. That's the subtext of much of what is going on. Sometimes not even subtext of suddenly humanity is on the menu, or we're no better than the things we eat. I like anything that cuts us down to size a little bit and examines that. And I think it's littered through the script in very interesting ways. So those are my three things. Let us see what my friend Matthew Hayden, not the cricketer, has chosen in his final video.
So, The Two Doctors, episode 3. And I think I'm allowed 3 choices here, if I understand the rules correctly, Toby. So, first of all, Patrick Troughton again, when he goes full androgam, which is delicious. And I love the fact that he still insists they dress properly to eat, as any gentleman or gentle androgam, if there is such a thing, knows. Top hats in Spain, I think, is my second choice. Nothing much more to say than that. Top hats in Spain. And third, the killing of Oscar. Really quite brutal. And I seem to remember that series was quite controversial for some of its violence and brutality, wasn't it? But really good, I think, to see a lovable character get killed, which, of course, nowadays is 10 a penny in things like Game of Thrones, etc., isn't it? Anyway, thank you so much for inviting me to do this, Toby. I really enjoyed watching them, taking it back to my youth, and I hope you enjoyed it too. See ya.
I feel bad now because Matt is wearing a cravat, and Matt does dress very well and like a gentleman, and this is the first of these. I videoed part 1. I haven't videoed parts 2 and 3 because I'm getting a bit behind with everything and setting up the videos and then editing them and putting them on YouTube to get watched by far fewer people. And because I've had some sort of other pulls on my time with a poorly partner and a need to earn a living, meant something had to give. So I was sort of delayed. There was quite a big gap between part 1 and 2, and it was partially because it's like, I've got to get the tripod out and I've got to set the things up, and then when you edit them, it takes you. So I thought, right, I'm going to motor on. I'm going to get a few of these in the can, and if that means not filming them. But unfortunately, Matt's done sort of visual gags as part of his, and is dressed in a cravat. So imagine a sort of a bald man in a cravat is what Matt is, and who I should have guessed would have, knowing him as I do, would have liked the appeal of the gentleman around Spain. Although he sort of did do that twice. He had the dressing for dinner. Oh no, because he had Patrick Troughton's performance at the Andrew. But the gentleman dressing for dinner, and then the top hats. And he did interesting. He chose the murder of Oscar. That is very, very interesting that he chose that. So after a good show in part 2, where I got a point from something I'd chosen in part 1, and I got another point because I kind of gave myself the benefit of the doubt. I didn't get any of that. So I lost again. Which is another another failure to hit the finals board, or to even register on the positive. I've never won, and I will continue not to. But I enjoyed that, although interesting, because I was sort of analysing it a bit more. Its faults did manifest themselves to me in a way that I haven't really cared about before, because I've watched the story purely for entertainment. I'm aware of its faults, but I still like it, and that's okay. What we like doesn't necessarily have to be good, or even to our taste, or we can like in spite of themselves, or in spite of, in fact, the contradictions within themselves. Yeah, which is interesting, and something I will. It will take me a while to digest, which is wholly appropriate. But well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was to your taste, and if it wasn't, there'll be, I'm sure something there is along soon. Nice to do a Colin Baker, because I haven't had a chance to do many of those. Nice to see my friend Matt, and nice to talk to you. I'm going to bed now, so good night, sweet princes and princesses everywhere. Thank you for listening to Happy Times and Places, presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest is Matt Hayden, who is on Twitter at Matt Hayden, E-N-T-T for Matt, Hayden E-N 65 on Twitter. Thanks to him, and thanks to the patrons who make these podcasts possible. They include Charles Gears, David Gillespie, Mark Findlay-Smith, Andrew Egan, Andrew East, Paul Dykes, Tim Dickinson, Robert Davis, Chris Davis, Rob Dawson, Matt Dale, Paul Philip Dahlgren, Dave Curran, Lee Kremin, Peter Crocker, Leslie Coots, Paul Cornell, Paul Colnaghy, Simon Coling, Charles Coffin, Steve Churchill, Susan Christian, Phil Chapman, Richard Straw, Stephen Moffat, Rob Leonard, Peter Harness, Peter Burns, Ruben Herfindahl, Nathan Martin, Trevor Smith, and David Green. The music for these podcasts is by Dave Gates, and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. And if you want to be one of those names associated with patronage, you can go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, and you get advance releases, exclusive material, and various bits of interaction with me. If this droning that I do on a regular basis isn't enough, you can sign up for £3 per month. That is the lowest tier, which still gets you access to most of the stuff available. And also, even at the lowest tier, if you sign up for a year, you get a 10% discount. So that's a lot of fun. However, a monthly commitment is a lot, and I'm grateful to those who have already committed, and I understand those who can't or do not fancy it. But if you want to do a one-off payment, I don't know, maybe you particularly enjoy one, or you're just glad that I've shut up for a while, you can go to kofi.com/Toby Hadoke and fling a few quid of your choice into the coffers. But I know times are difficult, particularly at the moment where just the cost of living itself is going up. So I'll tell you what, if I've just made your bus journey go a little better, or I've told you a fact you didn't know about an actor, or you just quite enjoy escaping from the world listening to this nonsense, then what you can do that costs you absolutely nothing but would show your appreciation is to go to your podcast supplier, or particularly Apple and iTunes, if you can get onto there, and give 5-star ratings to these. They're under Toby Hadoke's Time Travels, and perhaps a couple of lines of review as well, telling people about these things, because that increases their visibility and gives more opportunity for more people to savour them, and just means my labour is not wasted. Thank you very much. Oh, and you can follow me on Twitter at Toby Hadoke, and these podcasts have their own feed at Hadoke Podcasts. And look, I'm a stand-up comedian in real life. I do comedy in Manchester every Tuesday at Excess Malarkey Comedy Club, which has been running for 24 years. It's Tuesdays, 8 p.m. at the Bread Shed in Manchester. Look up Excess Malarkey online. And we also have a Twitch channel where on the first Sunday of every month we do a live show on Twitch, twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey. The shows stay up there for 14 days, and there's also clips of past shows. And we have fantastic comedians from around the world, TV names, headline comics, international acts, and it's all absolutely free. Again, there's an opportunity to donate, but absolutely no incentive so to do. And the club has been running for 24 years. We run on a not-for-profit basis because we believe in bringing comedy to as many people, accessible, good quality comedy to as many people as possible. So it's a good initiative to support as well, and I think you will be pleasantly surprised. So look, come along to that if you can, support that. I'd be very, very grateful. In the meantime, I think I should be quiet now because this podcast has lasted an hour and it's largely been my voice. I'm so sorry. Except, of course, you like the post-credits bit as well, don't you? Yeah, well, this is what that is. This is the post-credits bit. What can I say? Oh well, I'll tell you what. I'll let you to little fact. What I didn't mention when I broke out the DVD of this to watch, I think I did mention that I'd got an advance copy from a friend's magazine. So it's the only DVD I don't actually have the official release for. And I thought, well, it's going to be really hard to get the original copy because they withdrew it and removed the Jim will fix it clip and re-released the Two Doctors without Jim will fix it on it, because that would destroy the world, and the best way to learn from history is to deny that it ever happened. So I thought, God, it's going to be really hard to get hold of the original DVD, and it'll be really expensive. eBay, £4. So there we go. So I now have a complete collection of Doctor Who DVDs as a result of... Oh no, because I've still got the original Invisible Enemy with the malfunctioning ending. Because I never sent off for a replacement disc for that. That's just reminded me of that as well. Well, maybe I'll get that before it comes out on Blu-ray, or maybe I'll just live with it. But I now at least have the Two Doctors on the proper DVD release. So out of something evil must come something good.